It is an honor to be here and talk about the extension part of the Memorial celebration for 150 years. You know, often wonder when Abraham Lincoln signed that legislation with just and moral. They probably had a very broad vision, but didn't know the specific details of that vision. And so it's interesting to think, 150 years later, did we really play out what they intended? I travel a lot in my job. Like many in this room travel, and I have agreement with my wife. Whenever I get done traveling, I come home and we have a date night. And so a date night means she gets to pick where we're going to eat, and she gets to pick the movie. And I don't know about you, but when I like to relax, I like a movie where there's a chase scene or buildings are blowing up or some action's happening. And my wife, unfortunately, likes those date movies that are either a romantic or a comedy. And a few years back, I came back and we went and watched My Big Fat Greek Wedding was her pick. And I don't know if you've ever seen that or not, but it's two individuals that were from different backgrounds, different cultures, different religions, and they met and they fell in love and they wanted to get married. And all the dynamics that happen when you bring two clashing cultures and two different backgrounds together. And there's one scene in that movie where they're sitting on a bed. And she is lamenting the fact that, you know, this is not going to work. I might as well call it off now. There's no future in us getting together. And her brother walks in, and her brother was not worth a whole lot, but she explained the problem to him, and he said, you know what? He said something very profound. He said, you know, tradition defines who we are today, but should not prevent what we become tomorrow. And as somebody that went to school at Texas A&M University and many of our land grants, I know what tradition means. And I know it's important, and it does define who we are today, but it should not hold us back from what we're going to be tomorrow. And while I think Justin Morrill and Abraham Lincoln had a great vision for providing education to the sons and daughters of the working class, I wonder if they really understood what would happen when you add a research component to that. What would happen if you add an extension component to that? What would happen if you extend higher education not just for credit to the students on our campus, but across the state, to clientele, to ag producers, to 4-H members? What happens when you make that available? Can you really change the world? And I would argue that yes, you can, and yes, we have. As chair of ECOP, I've had a great year of really talking about what it means to be part of a land-grant university. And in fact, we're considering this year's celebration for the Morrill Act just to be the launching pad for the 100th anniversary of Smith-Lever Act in 1914. And so hopefully in a couple of years, Mr. President, Mr. Provost will come back here and talk about what Smith-Lever has done through the land-grant university. It's incredible. When I started Extension in 1981, I started in Amarillo, Texas, as an assistant county agent for animal, livestock, and 4-H livestock projects. And my trainer agent had been in that county for 35 years in the same county, Potter County, Texas. And he came to my office and laid on my desk a publication from ECOP, the Extension Committee on Organization Policy, called A People in a Spirit, that was published in 1969. And he said, you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into as a county extension agent. If you'd read this, it explains who we are and what we do. And it was a fascinating piece that talked about the role of extension as change agents. And it really shaped how I decided to do my work. And as Dr. Leholm said earlier, I've never worked with an extension county faculty or specialist that were not successful because they didn't know their subject matter. They're not successful because they don't understand people and interpersonal relationships. And I would argue that a career in extension is a career of working with people if you're going to be successful. And I've been fortunate in 32 years now to have been at Texas A&M, at Purdue, at Colorado State, and now at Montana State, and really see extension from a lot of different levels. And in fact, at Montana State University, I apologize, our president had to leave and catch a flight back home. She's actually speaking at new student orientation tomorrow, and I know that because my son is an incoming freshman, and he told me the president's speaking tomorrow. And so she had to get back to campus, but there's some things we're very proud of at Montana State. One, we're home to more land-grant universities than any other state. We are our 7 1994 tribal colleges. We have Montana State University. We have 8 land grants at Montana State University. The one piece that Montana State University holds in the history of extension is we had the first chapter of Epsilon Sigma Phi, the professional association for extension employees. And probably one of our most proudest accomplishments, our former president, now deceased, Mike Malone, served on the APLU at that point in time, the Soldier Committee, that talked about how do we incorporate our 1994 Indian institutions into a land-grant family. And so we've really left our mark through extension in Montana State University. But if I look at the enabling pieces of legislation, I look at our history, I wonder how we're going to be successful today, and more importantly, what it means to be a 21st century land-grant institution. And I have the benefit of standing before you this afternoon, having heard some very dynamic speakers about this and hearing their thoughts on this. And it kind of shaped my comments a little bit about what I think sets us apart as land-grant, and more importantly, what is the role of extension today in land-grant institutions. In fact, I'm concerned as a director. We've talked about challenges of funding. Smith-Lever funding has been stagnant or level for decades now. We have other funding sources to help our diagnostic labs, that help our youth programming, that help family and consumer sciences that are being challenged every day. I think we live in a society that has less appreciation for agriculture than ever before. If we woke up one day and instead of only paying about 11% of our expendable monthly income on food, paid 35% like the rest of the world, we would have a rude awakening about the role of agriculture in our society. I wanted to ask a former Secretary Ed Schaefer before he left a question. I was at the Ag Outlook Forum in January in Washington, D.C., where every former living Secretary of Agriculture was there. And every one of those, a recurring theme was national security is based on food security. And yet we don't invest money in food security. 70% of the USDA budget is for nutrition assistance programs. Not that that's not critical and very much needed, but I think when you look at USDA being the fourth largest federal government agency, it makes it look like we're very bloated. And in fact, less than 1% of the USDA budget actually goes directly to research and extension through Hatch funding and through Smith-Lever funding. And I don't think our society totally appreciates that if we lose capacity today, it will not come back tomorrow because we could not afford to put it back in a place like we have today. And so if you look at extension programming today, what is going to add the value? I continually talk to our legislators in Helena that we're not an investment. We're an investment, we're not an expense. And we're going to return value back to you 4 times over for your investment. But that's not working anymore because I was amazed our last legislative session in 2011, everybody that lined up to ask for money talked about how they're a good investment and they're a good value. And if you give us $1, we're going to return $4 to you. And in fact, we should be the richest state in the country if we actually did, and the metrics proved what we say we can do. I think in education, our metrics clearly prove that. 32% of our budget comes from state legislature to fund our higher education experience. I would argue that that's low because we're 49th and a 50 in the per capita expenditure for students. But our message has to be, what is the value of not just higher education, but of a research agenda and applied extension agenda that moves forward and helps us be successful. And so as I look at extension today, let me share some key words I think are critical to move forward. One, we have to be relevant in what we deliver. And I appreciated Rebecca's comments about what USDA is doing, our challenge of reinventing ourselves, but sometimes I think in extension it's not reinventing ourselves, it's re-educating people of who we are and what we do. And it's really communicating better. Let me give you an example. If you look recently and the world talks about sustainability and stewardship, I would argue that our ag producers were the original people involved in sustainability and stewardship, because if not, they wouldn't be here today. And we've let different factions of society take over ownership of sustainability and stewardship. We need to capture that back and communicate. That's what we do. In extension is help people be sustainable and help them be good stewards. If you look at youth development, you know, the big term nowadays is service learning. Every kid in K through 12 needs to be involved in a service learning activity. How do you give back? We've done that in 4-H for over 100 years. We've called it community development projects, community service projects. And so how can we capture that language back and say, you know, we've done that, we've done it well. We are national leaders in providing young people an experience to give back to their community. If you look at terms today in community development, who's doing community development? We do it in extension, we do it well. We need to call it community vitality, and how do we help struggling communities survive? So we don't need to reinvent ourselves, we need to learn how to use a modern language that people understand and value. If you look at the Kellogg Commission on the Future of Land-Grant Institutions, they took the terms that have founded the basis of land grants, of teaching, research, and outreach, and called it, it's really learning, it's really discovery, it's really engagement. Those are the terms that will carry us forward as people value what that is to a land-grant institution and why we are uniquely positioned to provide that when other institutions can't do that. And finally, I think we need to make sure in Extension that we add value to what it means to be a land-grant university. Everything I do at Montana State University, I lay over the top of the Montana State University strategic plan and even our accreditation plan and say, where does Extension fit? We're now going through a rewrite of our accreditation plan. We're going through a new strategic planning phase, and our core theme number 2 is engagement. As you heard President Cruzado speak this morning, she believes very much in the teaching, research, and engagement mission of land-grant university, and we are now going to measure every one of our undergraduate students before they graduate will have an opportunity to participate in an engagement experience. 3 years ago, we said every one of our undergraduates will have a research or creative experience before they graduate. Now we've added engagement to really fulfill and reinforce what it means to be a land-grant university. So you look at Extension in the 21st century, here's some key things I'd like to share with you as I wrap up. One, we have to be transformational. A lot of people out there can provide service. Extension has prided itself on providing service. We've got to move beyond that. We've got to be transformational in how we provide education across the state. We've got to look at public service and engagement as core to who we are and what we do. And I don't know about NDSU, but at Montana State, when we get a call, they don't ask, what's your appointment? What's the percentage of your appointment? They ask, who can help me at the land-grant university? Because this is my university. And so we really need to look at very seriously what it means to have public service engagement as part of our mission. Secondly, we have to have high-quality educational programming. There's a lot of fly-by-nights out there that offer education, but not at the quality we offer. During our 2011 legislative session, I had somebody on our Joint Education Subcommittee where our funding starts and said, you know, Doug, we need to invest less in extension and more in technology because people go to the web, and that's where they want their information from. Well, I don't know about you, and I've never met Mr. Google. I'm sure he's out there somewhere. And I know if you ask him a question, he will probably give you 3.2 million answers in a matter of less than 1 second. But you wonder the quality of those answers. Are they appropriate for the context? Can they interact with the requester? I used to think that Extension was really brokers of information. We've moved well beyond brokers of information. We're curators of information. We bring research-based, unbiased information to the end user in a way that's applicable to their situation, is going to help them solve their problems. That's the difference we make as a land grant. We need to be responsive to the needs of our clientele base. Last year, we actually started to have a wheat rust outbreak in Montana. We had a plant pathologist to help diagnose it early on. We were able to move in and treat it. And by her estimations, we probably stayed the state producer in the state $50 million. That's one salary that saved $50 million because she was responsive to the needs of clientele. And I think that's another thing that Extension brings because of our grassroots approach, is that we can be there and be flexible to meet those needs. And I greatly support what Arlen said about partnerships and innovation. We are not going to grow our funding at the county level through our state general fund or probably through federal appropriations. We're going to grow our funding through innovation and partnerships, and that's part of the future we need to create for ourselves. And then I also believe, besides being transformational, we need to be strategic in our thinking. And I don't know about you, but I have strategic plans sitting behind my desk that are very, very nicely well done in a really nice binder that I've never take out and look at. And so I've moved from beyond strategic planning to strategic thinking. Do we have a strategic roadmap that shows us are we on the right course? Do we have benchmarks for success? Do we have markers that show we're going down the right path? And to me, strategic thinking means we build on the human and community capacity that we can relate to an extension, that we look at economic opportunities and sustainability, and I would also argue that we are being called, and we being land-grant universities, more and more to be economic drivers of our state. We released an economic impact study before our legislative session last year. It's incredible when you talk about the teaching research agenda that we have at Montana State University, the value that adds within the state. And then finally, strategic thinking means we're good managers of our resources and we're good stewards of what we're given. So what does the future hold for land-grant universities? What does the future hold for Extension? First, I think for Extension, it's critical that we continue to enhance the land-grant university mission through engagement. And I encourage you in Extension to look for opportunities to add value to what happens at your land-grant institution or North Dakota State University here. We have got to move beyond just being a convener. I have many county extension agents telling me my role is to be a convener, to bring people together to solve problems, and convener is necessary, and a convener is an important role in many of our rural areas. We cannot just be a convener, we have to be a catalyst. And I'm challenging our extension agents to be catalysts for change in their communities and across our state. And then finally, we have to be transformational. I don't know about North Dakota State. Dwayne and I, or Chris and I have not had this conversation, but in Montana, with stressed county budgets, more and more our county extension office is called to be the supervisor for the weed district, the local county weed district, and I have no problem with that. I have a problem when it's the county agent that's standing on the edge of the sprayer, spraying the roadsides and the ditches and the parks, because that's a service that may be needed, but you can get that a whole lot cheaper than hiring a county extension agent to spray the weeds. The county extension agent ought to talk about how to control the weeds, proper calibration of the sprayer, proper chemicals to use, but transformational education does not happen at the end of the sprayer. It happens when you make decisions in what's going to work and what's the best advantage of those different chemicals. I heard a story, and I shared it with you. I was in Purdue for a while, and Purdue had 92 counties, smallest state west of the Appalachian Mountains, but had counties everywhere. And there's a story about a traveling salesman that was going through the back roads of Indiana and got lost. And he walked up to a farmhouse to ask for directions, knocked on the door, and nobody answered. Walking back to his truck, and he noticed the light was on and the barn doors cracked open. So he walked around to the back, and there was a farmer sitting there milking a cow. So he walked in there, and he explained he was lost and got the directions. And he said, well, thank you, and was leaving. And he had forgot his watch, and he walked back and said, hate to bother you again, but what time is it? I don't want to be late for my next appointment. And the farmer was sitting on that stool and kind of pulled down the udders a couple times and punched the side and cocked his head and says about 4:15, went right on away milking. So the salesman started leaving. He said, no, I got to figure that out. He went back and said, I hate to bother you one last time, but how can you tell time by milking a cow? And the farmer said, no problem, sit here on this stool. And so the salesman sat on the stool, and the farmer said, pull down on that udder a couple times, punch him in the side, cock your head, and you can see a clock right back there on the barn wall. People see extension, and sometimes they see land grants, and they see that cow. And let me tell you, agriculture is important for Montana as it is in your state. In extension, agriculture is 56% of my resources. But it's not all that we're about, because we've got to look in the future beyond just that cow. I think as a land grant, we are called to work with communities. We're called to work with families. We're called to work with people where a gap exists. And as Director of Extension in Montana, I always talk to our county agents and say, if we weren't there tomorrow, would somebody wake up and say, I sure wish we had something like extension? If we weren't there tomorrow, does it create a gap that nobody would step up and fill? If we weren't there tomorrow, would people say, I still wish we would have had extension as part of what we do as a land grant? We've got challenges. We also have great opportunities, and it's those opportunities that help me go to work every day to consider out what is the future, not just of the land grant, but the extension program in Montana.